Picture this. It's the dead of night, April 29th, 1942. Two massive flying boats, each loaded with nearly double their maximum weight, are skimming across dark waters just off the coast of Corregidor, the Philippines. Inside one of these planes sits an American nurse clutching a small bag. She's been working in hell for months, the tunnels of Corregidor, where she's watched thousands of men die. Now she has exactly one chance to escape. But here's the thing. She's not even supposed to be on this mission. These pilots, they've just flown deeper into Japanese-controlled territory than anyone thought possible. The bombed-out fortress of Corregidor is about to fall, and the only thing standing between these nurses, military personnel, and a horrific Japanese POW camp is 3,500 miles of enemy airspace, and two beat-up flying boats that are literally held together with hope. This is the story of Operation Flight Gridiron, possibly the most audacious rescue mission of World War II that you've never heard of. Today, we're diving deep into one of the war's most incredible aviation stories, a 6,500-mile round trip through enemy territory, mechanical failures, submerged rocks, exhausted pilots, and one moment that almost ended in friendly fire disaster. Buckle up. Let me take you back to early 1942. If you thought things looked bad for the Allies during World War II in Europe, the Pacific was an absolute nightmare. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor is attacked. December 8th. The Philippines get hit, and get hit hard. Within hours, the Japanese destroy most of the American Air Force on the ground at Clark Field, near the capital of Manila, on the island of Luzon. By Christmas, Manila falls. By February, the Dutch East Indies are collapsing. Singapore, the impregnable fortress, surrenders in the most humiliating defeat in British military history. The Japanese war machine is unstoppable. They're taking territories that took European powers centuries to conquer in a matter of weeks. Now focus on the Philippines. General Douglas MacArthur and his forces are trapped on the Bataan Peninsula and the tiny island fortress of Corregidor. They're starving, diseased, running out of ammunition, and completely surrounded. The men call it battling bastards of Bataan. No mama, no papa, no Uncle Sam. The nurses working there, they're now living in the Malinta Tunnel, a dark, dank underground complex that's being constantly bombed. Imagine working 18-hour shifts doing surgery by candlelight while the entire tunnel shakes from Japanese bombs. While this is happening, there's a US Navy unit that's been getting absolutely destroyed. Patrol Wing 10 started the war in the Philippines with dozens of PBY Catalina flying boats. These are big, slow seaplanes, beautiful in their own way, but built for reconnaissance, not combat. They've been fighting a desperate retreat through the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, getting shot at by Japanese Zeros every single day. By March 1942, they've lost 60% of their personnel and nearly all their aircraft. The survivors limp into Perth, Australia, with just 4 flyable planes left. The commander looks at his exhausted pilots and beaten-up aircraft and thinks, how the hell are we supposed to fight a war with this? But then, a message comes through. In April 1942, commanders in Australia received desperate communications from Corregidor. The fortress is about to fall. There are key personnel, intelligence officers, cryptographers, military leaders, and yes, nurses, who absolutely cannot be allowed to fall into Japanese hands. The code breakers alone know secrets that could change the entire war. If they're captured and tortured, game over. Someone has to get them out. But how? Submarines. A few have gotten through, but the Japanese blockade is tightening. Surface ships, suicide mission, regular rescue flights. The Japanese control everything between Australia and the Philippines. That's when someone looks at those 4 beat-up Catalinas in Perth and says, "What if?" The mission is codenamed Operation Flight Gridiron, and it requires 2 crews willing to do something certifiably insane. Plane 1, Boat 1, Commander Lieutenant Junior Grade Thomas F. Pollock, young but steady under pressure. Second pilot, Lieutenant Commander Edgar T. Neal, seasoned veteran, plus 5 crewmen, David W. Bounds, the plane captain, Mario Ferrara, W. F. Drexel, L. Gassett, and H. F. Donahue. Plane 7, Boat 7, Commander Lieutenant Junior Grade Leroy C. Deed, only 25 years old, with a southern drawl that would become legendary. Second pilot, Lieutenant Junior Grade William V. Guff, Jr., plus 5 crewmen, W. D. Eddy, M. H. Crane, M. C. Law, E. W. Bedford, and W. F. Kelly. These guys aren't special forces. They're regular Navy pilots who've been through hell and are about to volunteer for more. Here's the insane flight path. First, Perth to Shark Bay, 400 miles north, refuel. Then, Shark Bay to Darwin, 1,200 miles, refuel. Darwin to Lake Lanao, Mindanao, 1,500 miles through Japanese airspace, refuel and hide. Lake Lanao to Corregidor, 250 miles, land at night, load passengers, then return the same way. Total distance, 6,464 miles, and 3,900 of those miles are through Japanese-controlled airspace. Oh, and they have to do this in slow, unarmed flying boats that max out around 170 miles per hour. And they're loading these planes with medical supplies, anti-aircraft fuses that are desperately needed, radio equipment, and somehow they need to bring back 50 people. A PBY Catalina has a maximum passenger capacity of about 10 to 12 people for normal operations. They're planning to cram in 20 to 25 per plane, plus crew, plus cargo. The engineers shake their heads. The planes will be dangerously overweight. Takeoff will be nearly impossible. If anything goes wrong, the pilots look at each other. We'll make it work. April 27th, 1942, 10 a.m. The 2 Catalinas roar down the Swan River at Pelican Point. They're heavy, really heavy, but they make it into the air. First leg, 400 miles to Shark Bay. Smooth. Refuel. Rest for a few hours. 6 p.m. Now it gets serious. It's an overnight flight, 1,200 miles over empty ocean. The crews are already exhausted, but they push on. Little sleep, constant vigilance. The further north they go, the more dangerous it becomes. April 28th, 6:30 a.m. They arrive in Darwin. Darwin is a mess. It was bombed into oblivion on February 19th, 1942, the same carrier force that hit Pearl Harbor. The harbor is full of sunken ships. The town is evacuated. It's Australia's most exposed position. They refuel quickly. Every minute on the ground is dangerous. Lieutenant Commander Neal checks the intelligence reports on Lake Lanao. The army is supposed to have cached gasoline drums there, with local forces ready to help them refuel. Supposed to are the scariest 2 words in military planning. Here's where it gets absolutely wild. From Darwin to Lake Lanao is 1,500 miles almost entirely over Japanese-controlled territory or Japanese-patrolled waters. They fly low, really low, to avoid radar. They fly at night when they can. During the day, they're constantly scanning the skies for Japanese patrol planes. The PBY crews have learned the hard way that if a Zero spots you, you're dead. The Catalina is too slow, too weakly armed. Your only chance is to not be seen. April 28th, late afternoon. After 12+ hours of flying, they spot it. Lake Lanao, a large freshwater lake sitting at 2,300 feet elevation in the mountains of Mindanao. It's surrounded by jungle, And yes, it's surrounded by the Japanese too. They look for the signal. There, a flashlight, sending the recognition code. They flash back, but no response. Try again. No response. The Americans on the ground, members of the 14th Bombardment Squadron left behind, are getting nervous. Are these Japanese planes? The coded signal isn't working because the pilots don't know how to read the blinker code properly. Finally, someone just shouts across the water. That distinctive Southern American accent. No Japanese could fake that. Crisis averted. They almost shot at each other. The American soldiers on the ground are a skeleton crew, Sergeant Jenkins and 8 other men. They've been waiting for days, not even sure if the planes would come. They've had to negotiate with the local Moro people, Muslim Filipinos who definitely don't like the Japanese, but aren't particularly fond of anyone else either. They help camouflage the planes. They roll out the gasoline drums. The heat is oppressive, 105 degrees, mosquitoes everywhere, no rest. They keep watch while the exhausted pilots try to sleep. April 29th, 1942, 6:45 p.m. It's time. Both Catalinas fire up their engines. It's a short hop to Corregidor, about 250 miles, but it has to be done at night. Why? Because April 29th, 1942 happens to be Emperor Hirohito's birthday. The theory is that the Japanese might be celebrating, might be less alert. It's a slim hope, but it's all they've got. They take off from Lake Lanao as the sun sets. 11:20 p.m. The fortress is in its final days. The Japanese have been bombarding it mercilessly. There are fires burning everywhere. The whole island looks like hell itself. The Catalinas circle offshore. They flash the signal. Small boats emerge from the darkness. They cut their engines and settle onto the water. Here's who's waiting on those boats. Army and Navy officers with critical intelligence. Cryptographers who've been breaking Japanese codes. A few civilians, including the wife of a Navy officer. And nurses, brave women who've been working in those hellish tunnels for months. The manifest says they're taking 46 people total, but everyone knows it's going to be more. There are desperate people who aren't officially on the list. They load quickly, medical supplies off, people on. The boats go back and forth. Some people are crying, some are stone-faced. Everyone knows that Corregidor is doomed, and the people being left behind are facing either death or years in a brutal POW camp. Total time on the water, less than an hour. They can't risk more. Midnight, engines roar back to life. The Catalinas lumber across the water. With all that weight, taking off is nearly impossible. The plane bounces again. Finally, barely, they get airborne. They bank south, heading back to Lake Lanao. Behind them, Corregidor keeps burning. April 30th, early morning. The Catalinas arrive back at Lake Lanao just as dawn breaks. They need to refuel again for the long journey home. The passengers disembark for safety during refueling. The ground crew works frantically. Every hour they're here increases the risk of Japanese patrol planes spotting them. Late afternoon, time to go. The passengers reboard. Both planes taxi out to the middle of the lake. They need the longest possible takeoff run because they're so absurdly overweight. Boat 7, Lieutenant Deed's plane, goes first. The engines scream. The plane pounds across the water, once, twice, 3 times. And finally, incredibly, it's airborne. It banks south and disappears into the distance. Now it's Boat 1's turn, Lieutenant Pollock's plane. Engines roar. The plane accelerates. And then, wham! The hull hits something. A submerged rock. There's a terrible scraping, grinding sound. Water starts pouring in through a massive gash in the fuselage. Panic. The plane is sinking. The crew immediately starts damage control. They stuff the hole with anything they can find. Clothes, blankets, spare gear. They lash empty gasoline drums to the tail to keep it from going down. They build a makeshift raft of drums under the starboard wing. But here's the nightmare. They're stuck. Boat 7 is long gone. They're alone on a lake surrounded by the Japanese with a crippled aircraft. The American ground crew and the air crew work through the night. They use tree branches, army blankets, inner tubes, anything to patch the hull. It's a race against time. At any moment, a Japanese patrol could spot them. The passengers, nurses, officers are now stranded on Mindanao. They make their way overland to Del Monte airfield, hoping another plane can be sent from Australia. Meanwhile, the crew keeps working. By dawn, they've done the impossible. The plane is patched enough that it might fly. They fire up the engines. The plane groans. Water is still seeping in, but they're pumping it out as fast as it comes in. They taxi out. This is it. The takeoff run seems to last forever. The plane is sluggish, struggling. But then, miracle of miracles, it lifts off. It's flying, barely. The crew knows that if the patches fail, if the plane breaks apart mid-flight, they're dead. But they've come too far to quit now. Both planes are now racing back to Australia through Japanese airspace. They're flying low, often at night, constantly watching for enemy patrols. Boat 7 makes the journey in 5.5 days. Boat 1, with its jury-rigged repairs and water constantly seeping in, takes 6.5 days. May 2nd and 3rd, 1942. One by one, the Catalinas appear over the Swan River. They're battered, exhausted, but they're home. Out of the planes step 36 people who never thought they'd see freedom again. Not the 50 originally planned, because some had to be left on Mindanao when the plane was damaged. Among them are nurses who will go on to help care for wounded soldiers for the rest of the war. Intelligence officers whose work will help win the Battle of the Coral Sea and later, Midway. People whose survival matters to the war effort. But here's the tragic footnote. Those nurses and others who got stranded on Mindanao after the rock strike, most of them were eventually captured by the Japanese. They spent the rest of the war in brutal POW camps. Some survived, some didn't. Remember Lieutenant Junior Grade Leroy C. Deed, the 25-year-old pilot with the southern drawl who flew Boat 7 on this impossible mission? On June 17, 1942, just 6 weeks after Operation Flight Gridiron, he was flying a different aircraft near Sydney when his engine failed. The plane spun out of control from 500 feet. He was killed instantly. He never got to see how important his mission was. He never knew that the people he saved would help turn the tide of the war. Operation Flight Gridiron proved something crucial. Even when things looked hopeless, even when the Japanese seemed invincible, brave people could still accomplish the impossible. Those intelligence officers brought back code-breaking knowledge that helped at the Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942 and Midway in June 1942. The nurses went on to save countless lives. But more than that, this mission was a psychological victory. It showed that Corregidor wasn't completely cut off. It showed that the US Navy could strike deep into enemy territory and get away with it. Corregidor fell on May 6, 1942, just 4 days after the last Gridiron planes returned to Perth. The 66 nurses who couldn't be evacuated became the largest group of American women ever taken prisoner by an enemy force. General Wainwright surrendered and spent the rest of the war in a brutal Japanese POW camp. Patrol Wing 10 continued operating from Perth, eventually becoming Fleet Air Wing 10. Why haven't you heard this story? Good question. Operation Flight Gridiron was classified for years. The routes, the methods, the airfields, all top secret. By the time the war ended and the story could be told, there were so many other dramatic events that this one got buried. Plus, the mission didn't fit the narrative. It was successful, yes, but in a barely survived by the skin of our teeth kind of way. It wasn't a clean Hollywood victory. It was messy, dangerous, and honestly kind of terrifying. But that's what makes it real. That's what makes it important. Here's what gets me about this story. These weren't superheroes. They were regular people, Navy pilots, nurses, ground crew, doing impossible things because someone had to. Lieutenant Pollock, patching his sinking plane with blankets and inner tubes. Lieutenant Deed, flying 3,500 miles through enemy territory and then dying 6 weeks later in a routine training accident. The nurses, treating thousands of dying men in hellish conditions and then climbing into an overloaded flying boat for one last roll of the dice. They didn't know if they'd make it. They just knew they had to try. That's what Operation Flight Gridiron really represents. The moment when hope was at its lowest and people refused to give up. Thanks for listening to this episode. If you want to dive deeper into World War II Pacific theater stories, let me know in the comments. The sources for today's episode include US Navy War Diaries, National Archives records, and personal accounts from survivors. Everything you heard today is documented history, though it sounds like fiction. Remember those names: Pollock, Deed, Neal. They deserve to be remembered. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and never forget that history is full of incredible stories that haven't been told yet.